Tensions in the Gulf of Oman have escalated dramatically after the United States released footage showing military strikes on two Iranian-flagged oil tankers near Iranian waters. The incident, which unfolded on May 8, has intensified fears of a broader confrontation in one of the world's most strategically sensitive maritime regions. According to the U.S. military, the vessels, identified as the MTC Star 3 and the MT Sevda, were intercepted before they could enter an Iranian port along the Gulf of Oman. American officials claimed the ships were attempting to violate an ongoing U.S.-enforced blockade targeting Iranian maritime trade routes. The released footage showed aerial views of the two tankers moving across open waters before explosions erupted around them. The thick smoke could be seen rising from the vessels after they were struck. U.S. Central Command later confirmed that the operation had been carried out by American naval aircraft operating in the region. In an official, U.S. Central Command said U.S. forces disabled MTC Star 3 and MT Sevda May 8 prior to both vessels entering an Iranian port on the Gulf of Oman in violation of the ongoing U.S. blockade. American military officials stated that the strikes specifically targeted the ship's smokestacks in order to disable the vessels without sinking them. According to the Pentagon, the operation was designed to prevent the tankers from continuing toward Iranian territory while avoiding a large-scale environmental disaster or loss of civilian life. The U.S. military also claimed that the vessels were empty at the time of the operation. Officials described them as unladen tankers that had ignored repeated warnings before the strikes were authorized. The incident marks another major escalation in the increasingly fragile standoff between Washington and Tehran. Over the past several weeks, tensions in the Strait of Hormuz and surrounding waters have risen sharply as both sides accuse each other of provocations, ceasefire violations, and aggressive military activity. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most critical shipping corridors in the world. Nearly 20% of global oil supplies pass through the narrow waterway every day, making any military escalation there a matter of global concern. Even limited disruptions in the region can affect international energy prices, commercial shipping, and financial markets worldwide. The latest strikes come as the United States continues enforcing strict maritime restrictions aimed at pressuring Iran economically and militarily. Washington has accused Tehran of using regional shipping lanes to bypass sanctions and sustain oil exports despite mounting international pressure. American officials insist the blockade is necessary to maintain regional security and prevent what they describe as destabilizing Iranian activity across the Middle East. At the same time, Iran has strongly condemned the U.S. actions. Iranian authorities have accused Washington of violating international law and escalating tensions through military force. Tehran argues that the blockade itself is illegal and says the United States is attempting to strangle Iran's economy by targeting commercial shipping operations. The release of the footage appears to be part of a broader effort by Washington to publicly demonstrate its military reach and reinforce its blockade policy. By publishing the images online, U.S. officials may also be signaling to other vessels that future attempts to challenge the blockade could face similar consequences. Military analysts say the operation reflects a highly calculated approach. Rather than sinking the vessels outright, American forces appear to have targeted specific sections of the ships to immobilize them while limiting casualties and environmental risks. Still, the images have triggered intense debate internationally. Critics warn that attacks involving civilian-flagged tankers could dangerously widen the conflict and increase the possibility of direct confrontation between U.S. and Iranian forces. Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz have long been flashpoints for geopolitical tension. Over the years, the region has witnessed repeated confrontations involving warships, oil tankers, drones, and missile systems. However, the latest incident has added a new layer of uncertainty because of the growing military presence from both countries in such close proximity. Reports indicate that the United States has significantly increased its naval deployments in the region in recent weeks. Aircraft carriers, fighter jets, surveillance aircraft, and destroyers are now operating throughout the Gulf as part of ongoing maritime enforcement missions. According to U.S. officials, these deployments are intended to secure commercial shipping lanes and ensure compliance with blockade measures. But Iran sees the build-up differently, viewing it as an attempt to intimidate Tehran and expand America and military influence near Iranian territory. The latest confrontation also comes during an already volatile period across the Middle East. Regional instability has intensified due to ongoing conflicts, proxy confrontations, and diplomatic breakdowns involving several countries. As tensions continue rising, fears are growing that even a single miscalculation could trigger a much larger military crisis. Security experts warn that maritime incidents are especially dangerous because of how quickly they can escalate. Naval forces operating in crowded waters often have limited reaction time, and misunderstandings can rapidly spiral into armed confrontation. In this case, the visual release of the strikes has amplified global attention. The footage quickly spread across social media platforms, with observers closely analyzing every detail of the operation. Some experts noted that the strikes appeared highly precise, suggesting the U.S. military intentionally avoided causing catastrophic damage to the vessels. Others, however, argue that any attack on commercial tankers sets a troubling precedent and risks undermining international maritime stability. The Pentagon has defended the operation as a lawful enforcement action under its current regional strategy. U.S. military officials maintain that vessels attempting to enter Iranian ports in defiance of the blockade are violating restrictions established by Washington. In another statement, officials said all three vessels are no longer transiting to Iran. That reference included another Iranian-linked tanker reportedly intercepted earlier in the week during a separate operation in the same region. Despite the American justification, many international observers remain concerned about the long-term implications of the escalating standoff. Diplomatic efforts between Washington and Tehran have repeatedly stalled in recent months, with both sides trading accusations over military operations, sanctions, and regional influence. While indirect negotiations have occasionally continued behind closed doors, each new confrontation further weakens the possibility of a breakthrough. The situation is particularly sensitive because of the economic importance of the Strait of Hormuz. Any sustained disruption to shipping traffic through the waterway could impact oil supplies to major economies across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Commercial shipping companies are already reassessing risks in the region. Some operators have reportedly delayed routes or altered navigation plans due to concerns about military activity near Iranian waters. Insurance costs for vessels operating in the Gulf have also risen sharply as security concerns continue to mount. Regional governments have urged restraint from both sides. Several countries in the Middle East have called for immediate de-escalation, warning that continued military incidents could destabilize the broader region. At the same time, international diplomats fear that public military exchanges, especially highly visible operations like the latest tanker strikes, may increase domestic political pressure on both Washington and Tehran, making compromise even more difficult for the United States. The operation demonstrates a willingness to aggressively enforce maritime restrictions against Iran. The current administration under President Donald Trump has adopted a far tougher posture toward Tehran, particularly regarding oil exports and regional military activity. Iran, meanwhile, continues to insist that it will defend its economic and territorial interests despite mounting pressure. Military analysts believe the Gulf region may now be entering a particularly dangerous phase, with both countries maintaining a heavy military presence and political tensions already elevated. Even a limited incident could quickly expand into something much larger. The release of the strike footage itself appears carefully calculated. Such videos are often used not only to document military operations, but also to shape international perception and project strategic strength. In this case, the imagery sends a direct message about U.S. military capability and intent in the region, but the footage may also deepen resentment inside Iran, where officials have repeatedly vowed to respond to what they describe as American aggression. As the standoff continues, uncertainty hangs over what happens next. Neither side appears willing to back down, and the chances of renewed confrontation remain high. The incident involving the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda has now become another major symbol of the growing confrontation unfolding across the Gulf. For global markets, international diplomacy, and regional security, the stakes could hardly be higher. The Gulf of Oman remains one of the world's most strategically vital waterways and increasingly one of its most dangerous. What began as a maritime enforcement operation has now evolved into a broader geopolitical warning signal, one that reflects the fragile balance of power in the Middle East today. And as military activity intensifies across the region, the world is watching closely to see whether diplomacy can still prevent the crisis from spiraling further out of control.